Hello, welcome back to the channel. In this episode, we'll be going from the Shire to the Prancing Pony.
And something about the end of the world, but please, Mr. Gandalf, sir, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me in anything unnatural.
No. Perhaps not. I've thought of a better use for you. Come along, Samwise. Keep up.
Sam. Wood elves. They're going to the harbor beyond the White Towers. To the Grey Havens. They're leaving Middle-earth, never to return. I don't know why. It makes me sad.
Your love of the halfling's leaf has clearly slowed your mind. But we still have time. Time enough to counter Sauron if we act quickly. Time? What time do you think we have? Sauron has regained much of his former strength. He cannot yet take physical form, but his spirit has lost none of its potency. Concealed within his fortress, the Lord of Mordor sees all. His gaze pierces cloud, shadow, earth, and flesh. You know of what I speak, Gandalf. A great eye, lidless, wreathed in flame. Yes, Sauron. He is gathering all evil to him. Very soon he will have summoned an army great enough to launch an assault upon Middle-earth. You know this? How? I have seen it.
A Palantir is a dangerous tool, Saruman.
Why? Why should we fear to use it?
They are not all accounted for. The lost seeing stones. We do not know who else may be watching.
The hour is later than you think. Sauron's forces are already moving. Tell me, friend, when did Saruman the Wise abandon reason for madness?
Nothing. What is going on?
That Black Rider was looking for something. Or someone.
Frodo. Get down! I have to leave the Shire. Sam and I must get debris. Right. Buckleberry Ferry. Follow me. Come on.
What do you want?
Okay, so in that bit that we've just watched, there's a big emphasis on the quest and a journey. So we're really kind of into that space now.
Yeah, they've left. They're on the mission, aren't they? But I was thinking, in a certain sense, it's an inversion of a classic quest for a couple of reasons, really. One is that in the classic quest, and the most famous of all in this tradition, I think, that Tolkien is operating in, would be the quest for the Holy Grail.
Yeah.
Which I think it alludes to, the pursuit of a mysterious, religious, sacred relic. In this case, of course, it's not the Grail or the chalice that was used by Christ in the Last Supper, it's a ring. So it's a different object for a start, though it still, I think, alludes a little bit to that idea of the Christian quest, the quest for the Holy Grail. The reason I say it's inverted is that he already has that object.
Yeah.
So he's not going in pursuit of the lost holy relic, the Grail or the Ark of the Covenant or something like that. It's already in his possession, which is quite interesting. And the idea is how he holds it on a journey while keeping it away from Sauron, who wants to get hold of it. And of course, we've talked about this before, there's something in the ring which allows it to be attracted towards different people. So I think that's interesting. You know, we have a quest, but in a sense we've already got the thing that was that the quest was in pursuit of.
It's strange, isn't it? You're trying to get rid of the Holy Grail rather than...
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's trying to get rid of it, but certainly to not be fall victim to its power. And I don't think there's any question, at least so far, that the ring is always capable of being more powerful than anybody who holds it. We haven't met Sauron properly yet, so there's a question in my mind about what the relationship actually is going to be between Sauron and the ring. Gandalf had said earlier that they are the same thing, essentially. There's a coincidence of the two. There's a self-identity almost between the ring and Sauron. So there is this quest narrative with the object already found, in a way, and then that puts it in quite an ambiguous space as to what really the task is for Frodo. But then there are other elements of quest too. So there's the Grail quest. There's also the romance quest, capital R. So this refers to, you know, medieval literature and journeys, and the presence of horses and implicitly knights and dark horses, dangers along the way, ambushes, and so on. And in addition to that, the setting in a dark forest, which I assume is a reference to Dante, to the Divine Comedy, which begins in what Dante calls a selva oscura, a dark forest, and it's only through a process of crossing a dark forest that the ultimate test can be passed. You can't pass the test by staying where you are, so it's very important that you start in the Shire, go through the dark forest and come out at another point later on, and maybe many other points. But I think that's important, that the middle part of the journey, or at least this part of the journey, is a difficult one. It's arduous, fraught with danger and difficulty, and with the potential loss of the ring as well en route. So although there is an inversion of the quest insofar as the ring is already found, there's the ever-present possibility of it being lost again and then needing to be refound. So it's quite an interesting play between lostness and foundness, I suppose. that kind of runs throughout this scene.
Frodo gains a friend in Sam. I mean, they were already friends, but he gains a friend on his quest with Sam. And then we see Gandalf going to see the first of his order, Saruman, and he's deceived by his friend. So there's that kind of opposition going on there.
Mm.
What was your first impressions of Saruman?
So I think you're right. We have already established a brotherly love, really, between Frodo and Sam, Samwise, to use his full name. And Sam is positioned as a friendly, slightly more kind of stupid, basically, version of Frodo, but certainly non-threatening, loyal, slightly comic figure. And that's interesting because in the pecking order so far, we have had Bilbo, we've had Gandalf, and Frodo has appeared the youngest and most naive, really.
Yeah.
Now we have Sam as a contrast to Frodo, which enables Frodo to go slightly up the hierarchy. So he serves as a foil, essentially, to Frodo, to position Frodo as the slightly more knowing one. And occasionally you get shots of Frodo looking kind of in a slightly condescending way, affectionately condescending back towards Sam. So we have that parallel. And that seems to be based on the fact, A, they're hobbits, B, they're seem to be of a similar sort of age and gender, share a bit of a background, and are not in any particular other form of pact or sect or anything like that, unlike Gandalf and Saruman, that's his name, isn't it? Saruman. Well, it's interesting, just to pause slightly on the name, and it's interesting I got it slightly wrong there, because I was surprised to be introduced to a character called Saruman in a drama where, thus far, the baddie is called Sauron. Because the first few letters of the name are very, very similar to that of Sauron. I mean, I haven't seen them written down, but they would seem to be. And the moment I heard that, I thought, I wonder if there's going to be some confusion between Saruman and Sauron. And lo and behold, once we get into the precincts where Saruman keeps himself, there is a bit of a question there about his own character and the degree to which he may or may not actually have been got to by Sauron, may be acting on his behalf, may have done some sort of deal with Sauron, may be kind of politically compromised in a way that Gandalf hadn't been expecting. So Gandalf arrives there. This is clearly a much less naive, earthy, natural relationship than that between Sam and Frodo, and that, partly because they're older, but they come together as co-practitioners of an ancient art, almost like they're, fellow masons or something, who come together after long years of service, and they're in this sort of almost like a quasi-retirement, but they've established themselves, they've become elders or honorary members of this practice, which they're both capable of employing, secret dark arts. And it's interesting, again, I mentioned before, I think there are references to Shakespeare's The Tempest in this film, and you do see in the background of Saruman's eyrie, you see the books, the desk, as though he's still at his dark arts and learning cryptic skills that he can deploy. So it's got a very different feeling to it, and of course the setting is very different. We've moved from the kind of cornfields of the edge of the Shire into this Gothic cathedral-like world where, to put it schematically, the world of Frodo and Sam is a horizontal world. It's of landscape. It's of rolling hills. It's we get pictures of the sunset setting over the land. When we get into the world of Saruman, we're in the world of the vertical, and it's very clear that we've moved from A to B, from as it were a human space to, if not exactly a divine, at least a kind of, let's say, a transcendental space of some kind, where there's much more hidden magical authority, potentially divine, potentially satanic, And then, of course, we see Saruman pulling the rug, really, almost literally, from under the feet of Gandalf as he begins to really bend Gandalf's expectations almost 180 degrees. You know, Gandalf had come along expecting to have a kind of conversation between equals about what to do in this situation against a common enemy in Sauron. And in fact, he finds himself kind of ambushed and hijacked almost by Saruman. And actually, the theme of ambush is quite interesting because we get three versions of it in that clip. We get the boys in the cornfield being ambushed by the two other boys who jump out of the cornfield at them. We get the dark horse, the Dark Knight, ambushing the boys in the middle of the forest. And then we have Saruman effectively ambushing Gandalf.
Yeah.
He lures him into his eyrie and then traps him.
Yeah.
So there are kind of three elements of ambush, and all of those actually fit with this notion of a quest and a journey which is interrupted along the way and put at risk.
We see Saruman using the seeing eye.
Yeah. And it's interesting, there are a few references to seeing, because we have a reference to Sauron seeing things, and this notion of almost like a third eye, but a third eye that's become maniacal one way or the other. We also have the vision of the wood elves too.
Yeah.
So there are notions throughout of a kind of higher order seeing, or being able to see either into the future, into a truth, into something invisible, or more profoundly into a deeper idea of what the ultimate fate of everybody is going to be. So they're seeing and then they're seeing. And I think that's interesting given the very strong contrast in that clip between the sunlight of the world that Frodo and Sam are leaving and the kind of darkness of the forest, as well as of the kind of castle-like atmosphere that Saruman inhabits. So yeah, seeing becomes an all-important thing. And seeing is then connoted, I think this idea of seeing into the future, seeing into the truth, is also indexed with the idea of remote movement. So we have acts of telekinesis by Saruman, where he, by will, essentially flips Gandalf around, spins him around, sends him up into the
Well, he's got both
sky.
the staffs, and he's like...
Yeah, he's got both the staffs. And, you know, I mentioned Dante earlier and the Selva Oscura, the dark forest. There is a reference in Dante, I can't remember if it's in the Purgatorio or where it falls exactly, but he has this image as well, a kind of spinning doctors, I think they are, in this almost ecstatic frenzy. In his case, it's more like a divine frenzy. But again, I wondered if that perhaps was, if not explicitly, a kind of implicit allusion there. But either way, we get acts of magic at a distance, seeing at a distance, or moving things at a distance through an effort of will. Telekinesis, to use the technical phrase. And that for me is all interesting because to me that connects to the wood elves. And particular, I mean, I'm almost certain that Tolkien will have been very familiar with, I mean, I haven't done the scholarship, but I'd be surprised if he wasn't familiar with Fraser's The Golden Bough, which was a kind of huge, extensive encyclopedic work of anthropology at the beginning of the 20th century that was a work of kind of comparative anthropology, looking at magic rituals around the world. And one of the things Fraser insists upon is that in magic there are always beliefs in actio in distans, being able to create action at a distance, remote controlling of events, either through thought or some other kind of intention, voodoo dolls and so on. And the reason why that's connected with the wood elves is because in Fraser's The Golden Bough, it really begins with a scene of fairies dancing in a grove under a golden bough in an Italian landscape as painted by Turner. So Turner paints this image, which is to do with fleeting nymph-like creatures at this sacred tree somewhere near on the outskirts of Rome, I think it is, by a pool. I can't remember exactly. And Fraser takes that as his inspiration to write about magic practice and fairies throughout the world. And he compares, places in South America, Papua New Guinea, Australia, Europe, and so on. So I did wonder if there was perhaps, at least at the back of his mind, Tolkien's mind, some reference there to the notion of the golden bough. And even if it wasn't, we still have kind of fairies there, essentially the wood elves, passing by, suggesting magic ritual. And it's actually a rather beautiful moment in the film, I think.
Yeah, that's the first time I've seen that, because that's part of the extended cut, so that actually wasn't in the theatrical edition.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
It is rather beautiful, and I think it's rather beautiful because they appear out of nowhere. And again, I think that connotes something magical, the sort of vanishing from thin air rather than into thin air. Secondly, they appear in the middle of this dark forest at a time of danger, as if to represent something soteriological or to do with saving, that they might have a capacity to save people. And thirdly, because the whiteness, the ethereal whiteness, makes such a contrast with the blackness, or at least darkness of the forest, and the way they kind of lightly tread on the earth, I think, is very interesting in a drama that is so earthy in so many ways. Well, it's earth and fire, I think, are the principal elements, really, but they're not earth and fire. They're very much air, spirits of the air, aren't they? So we get that contrast, I think.
Yeah, and they just seem so untouchable in the sense that they're there, but they're not there. Like, they're part of the story, but they're also above the story.
Yeah, so not only do they look spectral, they are almost ghosts within the story itself. So it's quite interesting they were cut from the other version that you mentioned, because even from an editorial perspective, they were there and not there at the same time. So there are several layers in which their presence was also, as it were, diluted by a kind of absence or an intrinsic not quite being there. I mean, from a philosophical point of view, you'd say they were, ontologically compromised, for want of a better word.
What does ontological mean?
It's to do with the study of being.
What can you say about the symbolism in this section?
Yeah, so we have the ring again. I've touched on the fact that I think particularly in this clip, there is an allusion to the Grail. We also talked in a previous episode about the emptiness of the ring, the roundness of the ring. And I think in this clip, in this phase of the film, what the ring is essentially becoming is a question.
Yeah.
That's what it's really standing for. A question over, will Frodo survive? Will he be okay? Will the ring survive? What is the destiny of the ring going to be? What's Gandalf's claim over it? What's Sauron's claim over it? What's Saruman's claim over it? So the hole in the middle, the emptiness now, I think, serves as a marker for an open question. Essentially, that's what it is. So it's not like it's a symbol of, love or death or whatever. It's not quite as straightforward as that.
Yeah.
I think it is both pseudo Grail, insofar as it relates to a literary and theological tradition, but I think functionally it's serving to symbol the open question and the holding open of the drama per se, as it proceeds. So that's the ring. We've then got the dark horse.
Yeah.
It's hard not to think of the horseman of the apocalypse and the black horse and the potential for messianic revelation, but revelation through judgment of something that will lead to damnation. Because I think one of the reasons there's a question mark over the ring is that there's the potential, I think, at least insofar as it's connoted with Sauron, that it could lead to the destruction of Frodo, to the corruption of Frodo, to the turning diabolical of Frodo, And I think that's borne out by the fact he's presented, partly because his face is so naive, as a figure of candor, trustworthiness, openness, innocence, and so
Yeah.
on. He's precisely presented like that in order to make the risk of him flipping into something that's the opposite all the more intense.
Yeah.
And that's partly, I think, what the Dark Horse does. It says, we're in an environment here where things can change and people can be affected, a bit like Saruman, and lose what we thought was going to be
Yeah.
a virtuous set of characteristics and have them compromised by something more vicious and more deadly.
Yeah. And it really feels like the story's starting now. There's been a kind of a lot of setup and background, and now the story's starting. And with Saruman not being on Gandalf's side, we fear for Gandalf now.
We do fear for Gandalf now, and it's becoming more complex. Although we thought perhaps this was going to be goodies versus baddies, we now have Saruman who's now quite hard to compute. We don't quite know where he stands. He's clearly manipulating Gandalf now. Gandalf essentially has fallen into his trap, but we don't quite know how far Saruman's allied himself with Sauron, or is working for himself or other agents, and so on.
Yeah.
And the effect of that is partly that it just as we've had a contrast between Frodo and Sam as more and less innocent, or less and more innocent, now we have a contrast between Saruman and Gandalf. So Gandalf, who had seemed very wise and experienced in relation to the Shire and the hobbits, is now positioned as relatively naive compared with Saruman. So we get, there's obviously a parallel between the Sam Frodo relationship and the Saruman Gandalf relationship. And I guess a bit of that naivety was already represented when Gandalf said to Frodo, "I'll meet you at the Prancing Pony." The Prancing Pony is a very obvious naive symbol compared with the Dark Horse. We have a Dark Horse and we have a Prancing Pony. Well, Prancing Pony sounds almost ridiculous by comparison with the Dark Horse. It's a very, again, somewhat domestic, rural, parochial figure. But nevertheless, Gandalf is the one who has identified that as the meeting place. And I think that's one of the ways in which his relative innocence to Saruman is being set up. So in a certain sense, it shouldn't be a surprise that we see him outflanked by Saruman in that scene towards the end.
I want to ask you about the music. We're establishing themes of music now.
We're establishing themes of music. There are clearly some leitmotifs which recur. I think I've said before, to me, the main references or the antecedents or influences on that score are Wagner, Holst and Vaughan Williams. I'd say those come and go depending on where we are. The Shire is more associated with kind of Vaughan Williams, English folk tradition played in a classical register. And in brackets, we also have some kind of flute music, pipe recorded music, which often is associated with kind of medieval folk. But then we get the more portentous, heavy, more obviously operatic phrasing of the music, particularly in the forest. And clearly, the pace quickens and we're in the space of adventure now, not just a space of kind of opening up and landscape and so on. Although as we approach Saruman's lair, which it pretty much is, the music again reverts to something we had, if I'm right in remembering, right back at the beginning, before Galadriel's opening spiel, which is more like kind of medieval polyphony, and that's suggestive, I think, of dark arts, secret knowledge, and forces which could be divine but might not be divine.
Yeah. So we see Frodo be affected by the ring for the first time. He is stopped from putting the ring on by Sam. So for me, that's the kind of start of a relationship there between them, of Sam being quite reliable and loyal.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, as I was saying, perhaps unkindly, he is presented as the slightly dumber one, and yet he's, because out of loyalty or whatever, and a wish to protect his friend, perhaps there is a wisdom that comes with that kindly brotherly protectiveness. So he may not know what the ring is, but he's got a strong enough intuitive sense to recognize that it's not completely
Yeah.
going to be something that's going to do everybody a favor. And I think it's very interesting, because the ring is ambiguous, we don't quite know what it connotes or how it works for different people. I think that's very well represented by the almost putting it on,
Yeah.
not quite putting it on. The ring almost on the screen kind of havers in the space between being worn and not being worn. And I think that captures very nicely the ambivalence around it.
Yeah.
Do like and subscribe to the channel. When we get subscribers, it really motivates us. So, and we've got an awful lot of Lord of the Rings to get through, so please subscribe.
Thank you, and we'll see you in the next one.